everyone, and welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Dashew, and I am joined by the man who put the Ike height in Mike White March, Mr. Mike White.
Did the microphone just cut out?
No, I actually did Ike height in Mike White.
Oh, okay.
The microphone cut out. What? What? No, it did not.
Chris, it's good to be here.
It is, it's good to be here on planet Earth. It's good to be here talking about a movie where Dennis Hopper gets raped by a bunch of men. Boy, whew.
Branded and raped.
Branded and raped. The Mad Dog Morgan story. So on this episode of the Culture Cast, we're going to be talking about the second to last film in Mike White March, a film that it's pretty Australian. A lot more. I would say it actually goes even farther in the Australia genre than the last two films, because this is a film set in the Australian outback. We'll be talking about Philip Mora's Mad Dog Morgan.
Philippe
Phillips. Hey, Philip Mora.
In the autumn of 1865, notorious bushranger Daniel Morgan crossed from New South Wales into Victoria to do battle with the law for the last time. What happened has been a secret for over 100 years. Now the fascinating truth can be told.
Stand! Or he'll blow your bloody head off, and I'll knock out all your teeth.
I want the cry of my hounds in his ears. I want his spleen on my desk by sundown.
The truth about Mad Dog Morgan is now an epic movie, recreating the turbulent gold fields, the sprawling sheep stations, and the festering prisons of early Australia.
Help! Help! You wouldn't be so game if I wasn't tied down like a dog.
Dennis Hopper,
Man up, Bulgy, move forward!
in the finest performance of his career, brilliantly recreates the enigma that was Morgan. A giant of a man trapped by the nightmare of his own legend.
The way he looked at me, Lord, and dressing me with his eyes. God, nightmares for the rest of my life. God, thought of him kissing me, touching me. Horrible, disgusting.
I've missed so much of my life, sir. And I'm not trying to be sentimental either. Do you know how lucky I am to be Dan Morgan, sir?
Mad Dog Morgan brings you all the passion, the spectacle, the savage beauty of the tumultuous gold rush era, vividly portrayed by an outstanding cast.
Ha! Boomeranged!
What next? To corroborate?
You could have been shot.
Shot be damned, I'm the magistrate of Wagga Wagga.
The police across the river border are totally and completely incompetent. We will not tolerate anarchy in our colony.
Everyone is talking about it. You won last 24 hours in Victoria. As senior officer here, I assume command of this situation.
I'll get the bastard.
He's a name with £1,000 reward and blood on his hands.
This is Morgan country, where it happened. And this is Morgan. Ferociously violent, unexpectedly kind.
My wagon? I'll be giving you £1. And only for one reason, that I may have to take it back from you someday.
Mad Dog Morgan,
He's got giant balls, that one.
symbol of terror to the wealthy and the powerful.
Burn it down, Billy! Burn it down! Burn it down!
Was he a monster or a martyr? A ruthless bandit or a rebel hero? Outwitting, outriding, outgunning an army of police. Here at last is the truth about Mad Dog Morgan, the outlaw's outlaw.
It is based on Morgan by Margaret Carnegie. It stars the method actor man himself, the legend, Mr. Dennis Hopper. Also stars David Gulpilil, who is a fantastic Aborigine Australian actor. You may have seen him in such films as Crocodile Dundee playing. I guess he plays what in that movie? He plays Crocodile Dundee's like buddy, like Aboriginal buddy.
Yeah, I guess so. I mostly know him for like Walkabout and The Tracker, a couple other things. The Proposition, he was great in.
So, yeah, I only know him from Crocodile Dundee, which means I've only seen the most, like, mainstream thing that I guess he's been in, right? So, but
probably.
This month was programmed by your Australian friend, which lends us a little bit of credibility when it comes to talking about why we're talking about this movie. In your mind, I have an idea as to why he picked this film. I'm curious what you thought of this film and why you think he picked this film.
What I thought of this film was it is kind of crazy. It is not the same kind of crazy that we've seen over the last 2 weeks. This is more of like an art house crazy. It's almost a little Jodorowsky. There's some interesting dream sequency type stuff going on. There's a disappearing and reappearing mustache that is happening here. Apparently, Philippe Mora, he is Australian, but he spent a lot of time in France and doing like more artsy-fartsy kind of stuff, and I would love to see those movies that he's working on. So he has that legitimate background, comes back to Australia, makes this movie about kind of a folk anti-hero type of guy who wasn't Ned Kelly, and gets Dennis Hopper, who is now pretty much persona non grata in Hollywood after making the last movie, his film that got him tossed out of Hollywood on his ear. And man, it is just like adding gasoline to an already burning fire here with the Australian film scene where it's at, throwing Dennis Hopper in there, and the results are unpredictable.
Yeah, so Dennis Hopper is, and you know, you find this out by reading about him or watching Not Quite Hollywood, which is a documentary all about exploitation films. I would say watch it. The only parts of it that I cannot stand are anytime Tarantino is literally jerking himself off on screen and making the entire documentary about himself as opposed to the films they're talking about. But other than Quentin Tarantino's obnoxious asides, the Not Quite Hollywood documentary goes into Mad Dog Morgan a lot. And it talks about Dennis Hopper, who sounded like a fucking pain in the ass to work with. More than a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Like a total sociopath. Which is fine because that comes through on screen.
Yeah, they use that unhinged person.
Real unhinged.
Yeah. Yeah. And like he did not get a lot of admiration from his Australian co-actors in this. Apparently, they didn't even like that he was using this weird Irish accent, which kind of makes sense because at this point in history, everybody is coming to Australia, and there really isn't an Australian accent established yet. But his Irish accent is really grating.
Yeah. His accent in this movie is distracting, and I appreciate that he took a position and went with it, if that makes sense. But just because you made a decision doesn't mean you made the right one. You made a decision, not necessarily the right one.
This movie reminded me a lot of Sam Fuller's Run of the Arrow, and I think that's because of the Irish accent, because Rod Steiger has an Irish accent in that, though he is a Southerner, so he's kind of got two accents competing with each other, which is fantastic. He leaves the South because he's disillusioned, goes out, ends up living with the Indians, so there's kind of that displaced white guy kind of a thing going on. Even though he doesn't necessarily live with the Aborigines, he does have, David Gulpilil as his, as Billy, his kind of spirit guide, and teaching him how to live in the wilds and being, in the outback rather than being back with the rest of civilization who wants to kill him.
Yeah. And, that, like you said, that this formula is not played out, but I mean, nowadays it kind of is. White guy in the wilderness, African American, Aborigine, any sort of ethnicity who is the person who is of the land helping them out is very much a trope that you can seeing like a lot of cinema. I think this movie does it well. It does it in a way that, like you mentioned, it's almost Jodorowsky-esque. It's very like, not ethereal, but it's a little heady, which is kind of interesting because that was not what I was expecting when I sat down to watch this movie. I was not expecting this kind of heady ideas being brought to the table about Mad Dog Morgan and who he was.
Yeah, that was very unexpected because especially I used to see this on VHS, the cover for it, and it just looked ridiculous. Just the picture of Dennis Hopper with the big fake beard. He looked like he was some sort of outcast from like a Hatfields versus McCoy kind of a, cartoon almost. And he makes it work and everything kind of comes together in this, surprisingly, almost despite itself.
Man, the beard is real bad.
That beard is hilarious.
I mean, it would be like you or I going down to the local Spirit Halloween store and buying one of those prospector beards and Spirit gluing it to our face. It looks real bad.
Go back to Party City.
Yeah, like... It's comically bad. When I mean comically bad, like children's, we can't say children's play anymore because apparently a high school put on a recreation of fucking Alien and killed it. So I guess I can't rag on like a high school drama presentation of the 12 Commandments with someone with a giant beard pretending to be Moses. But that's like what it feels like with this movie.
I expected to see the rubber band behind the back of the head.
Exactly. It's like in the Little Rascals when they have the beards and they go to the bank. It's that bad. It's astounding. And you pull it down like, oh my God, it is distracting in a way that I was not expecting.
I really like what they do, too, with the introduction of the Detective Manwaring character at the beginning, played by Jack Thompson, and the way that he speaks to the camera. So it also adds this level of documentary feel to it. It reminds me kind of like Peter Watkins and Culloden or whatever that he was doing, where he will do these kind of faux documentaries where cameras weren't necessarily already there, but he's introducing cameras to it. So having him on screen, having Manwaring on screen speaking to us, and I think he's using some of the language right out of Margaret Carnegie's book, and talking to us about this stuff, and having him come back a few times, I was like, oh, this is very effective.
And that's, again, like, that's the thing about this movie that I appreciated, is it wasn't just a straightforward, not like biopic, because it kind of is a biopic, but it's like, I appreciated that it really does do different things with different styles of, like, cinema and, like, narration, and it's really weird, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that incredible, like, dream sequence thing that's going on, where we've seen it. Actually, it's in like every documentary about this movie, where Grant Page set himself on fire and jumps off of this the cliff into the water, but he had to do it twice, and the one time where he almost caught Dennis Hopper on fire was like, oh my God.
Right? Like, holy shit. Like, let's light our main actor on fire. Though, to be fair, I'm not sure Dennis Hopper needed much to be lit on fire during this filming of this film, because it sounds like his blood alcohol content was... I mean, at one point, his blood alcohol content was so high, he should have been dead. Like, I'm not kidding, right? Like, that's real. He got reported in his blood alcohol reading he should have been dead. Clinically should have died from how much he was drinking.
Yeah. Yeah, what was it? Like, and then I found the rum was like the end of one of the stories.
He like found some like overproof rum and drank. He like poured a bottle on Mad Dog Morgan's grave and then drank another bottle himself.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you doing, Dennis Hopper? Man, the 70s were a wild time, weren't they? I sent a used condom to my cast members. I was drinking myself to death and almost got lit on fire. Yeah, you know what, Jared Leto? I think I'm a little bit more impressed by Dennis Hopper's method acting than yours. Because it's impressive method acting. It comes through in this film in spades. I really appreciate Dennis Hopper's commitment, quote unquote, to the craft. It's not much commitment when you're just being yourself, though.
Right.
Like, Dennis Hopper sounds like he was a menace in the 70s. And he was.
Yeah. Kind of a menace to himself and to others.
Yeah. Which is be a menace to yourself, fine. Being a menace to other people, that's not great.
Right.
It's like your director or like the actors or getting deported from the country.
I think it was there's a documentary called Along for the Ride, and it's about Satya de la Manitau, who was his assistant kind of kept him out of some trouble as much as he possibly could. And he makes reference to Satya a couple times, like in these different documentaries, just kind of offhanded, he'll say his name. And in this Along for the Ride documentary, they talk to Philippe Mora, and he tells this whole story, and I can't remember if it's in Not Quite Hollywood as well or not, but this whole thing about making a likeness of Dennis Hopper. Have you heard this story?
I have not.
Okay, so he was pretty much convinced that Dennis Hopper was either going to get kicked out of the country or drink himself to death, or just something was going to happen. So he got this bright idea, this is more I'm talking about, to make a replica of Hopper's face so that he would be able to like put that on someone else and be able to shoot like long distance shots of Mad Dog Morgan if he needed to do any sort of pickups or anything if Dennis was dead, basically. And so he had to come up with this whole cover story for it, and he because Hopper's like, why do you want to make this mask of my face? That's not cool. He's like, oh no, there's going to be a dream sequence where your head flies off and it explodes or something like that. And he's just like, oh yeah, out of sight, man. And so then like the last day comes and Dennis is like, what, we never did that shot of the head flying off. He's like, oh yeah, no, don't worry about it, you know, it won't I changed my mind or something like that. And then there was this whole kerfuffle about like what was going to happen with this head afterwards. But yeah, so Philippe Mora was no fool as far as this guy could go at any minute.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that Dennis Hopper really, like, he not directed, but made the film directors have to push the film in one direction or another is a really weird thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's not great for like the making of a film when you're an outsider in a country that you've been hired to work in. I think that's the thing here that maybe gets overlooked a little bit. It's like Dennis Hopper is not Australian, and he came to this country to film a movie, and he acted like a clown.
Well, it was at this point where, like, they were importing actors from other places and using them. It was almost like that Italian model where, okay, we'll import this bigger name. And at this point, Hopper was still a name. But, you know, like even when they did Ned Kelly, like, oh, we'll get Mick Jagger in here and we'll put him in this movie. And, you know, other times, like, you know, Wake and Fright, like, we'll have Donald Pleasence in here. But Pleasence, you know, he was more of just a solid actor. He wasn't necessarily a box office draw. But, yeah, it was kind of a weird thing. I guess even with Jimmy Wang Yu last week, talking about Man from Hong Kong, like, here we'll bring this guy in and put him in this movie. But, yeah, this was kind of a strange thing. Because the rest of this cast, I mean, we are seeing all of those familiar faces that we've talked about in the last few weeks, like Roger Ward and Hughes Keys Byrne and all of these guys. You know, Grant Page, I mentioned, he's been doing stunts in a lot of these movies. He's the guy that, you know, Jimmy Wang Yu chased down last week in The Man from Hong Kong in that overly long foot chase where he got kicked off of a motorcycle. So we've got all of these great...
Frank Thring is in this movie?
Yeah, Frank Thring. Bruce Spence shows up in this movie, but like blink and you'll miss him kind of a thing. So, yeah, it's just all of these great Australian actors, and then we plop Dennis Hopper in there, and it could have gone bad, but I think it kind of works.
No, it kind of works. I mean, knowing the story behind it, when you watch the film, you kind of like it. It doesn't fill in the blanks, but it kind of explains why certain scenes are the way they are, and certain decisions were made the way they were made. And I mean, at least for me, I don't know about you, but it kind of explains like why they did things the certain way that they did.
Yeah, no, it really helps to know the background before you go into this movie.
Yeah,
because otherwise, I mean, you know, Troma ended up picking up this movie in the U.S., and that's kind of fitting because this is as messy as a lot of Troma films.
Oh no, it totally is. It is like as messy as I can't even like. It's such a messy film, and it's like all over the place. And Philippe Mora does some interesting things right. He does some interesting things wrong. He makes some interesting choices that I would say set this film apart from its ilk that we've seen so far. It really does have like a art house not cinema verite, but kind of.
Yeah, no, there was definitely some like I said, some documentary aspects to it. Yeah, the surrealism in here.
Yeah, the intro of the film is very much cinema verite, which is cool. I mean, it's Philippe Morris really kind of doing all sorts of different things and seeing what works. And I would say most of it works. But my biggest condemnation of this movie is that it is 99 minutes and it feels like 2 hours. It is so slow in spots, and it drags a lot in those spots. When it drags, it really drags.
I can't disagree, no. Oh, going back to Frank Thring real quick, he is fantastic as the bad guy in here, and he's got such a good look to him.
Yeah, he's a fucking scumbag in this movie, right? Like, he has Mad Dog Morgan's nutsack cut off.
Yeah, so he can make a change purse out of it, I think it was?
Tobacco pouch.
Tobacco pouch, thank you.
Great. And he's like, he said cut off his scrotum and also flay his beard.
Yeah.
Did that actually happen?
There's some controversy. I did read a book about the making of this movie, and the author went into a lot of that stuff. It was the book was just called Mad Dog Morgan, and it was put out by Australian Screen Classics as part of a series. And Jake Wilson, the author, went into a lot of stuff as far as what was real, what wasn't. And it's one of these, like, you can't really tell this, the full story because it happened so long ago.
Well, and also he's like a folk hero. Like,
yeah, exactly.
The thing about this movie that I don't think maybe us as Americans appreciate is this guy's a folk hero. He's not a villain. He's very much like a folk hero who was standing up to the oppressive regime that was the British Empire, which is super fun in a way. But like in this film, Mad Dog Morgan he's played as such, but not really.
Right. There's that one scene where he goes to the guy and he's like, oh, I want you to pay all of your workers and blah, blah, blah. But then apparently in real life, the guy just like canceled all the checks after he wrote them or something. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of a dick move.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So he wasn't the most effective folk hero around. But yeah, he was trying. He was trying to be like a mix of John Brown and Clyde Barrow.
Yeah. But back to the question at hand. You were reading this book. Did they because it's like a folk legend about a real person, they don't know if he was actually eunuched in death?
Yeah, it was kind of controversial. And then also like the author was like, I didn't have that in my book, but they added it in and that didn't represent me and blah, blah, blah. And like, there was a lot of like, don't besmirch the good name of this historian who wrote this book and make this movie into this exploitation thing. So, yeah, it was pretty nebulous as far as what was the real story.
Well, and I can kind of understand that, can't you? It's like you're really sensationalizing this to a point that it seems almost just to show how dastardly the villains are.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's that whole Liberty Valance thing. When legend becomes truth, print the legend or whatever that is.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, exactly. And I think when I walked away from the end of this film, when you have Frank Thring who doesn't get his quote unquote comeuppance, you're like, why was this here? It just feels unnecessary. It feels sadistic in nature for no reason other than to be sadistic.
Yeah, I think it might be a little one last swipe at the oppressors kind of a thing. Right. Just like see how bad they were to us.
They were so bad that their own people were divided on whether or not they should be doing this to begin with.
Exactly.
But I think overall, if we're talking about like the performances in the film itself, outside of the runtime and Dennis Hopper's hilariously comical, goofy ass black beard that like it doesn't even match his hair color. Like it's so dorky. I think it's a fun movie.
And there's that point where he like shaves the mustache, but then the mustache comes back later or something. I was like, what?
Yeah. The disappearing, reappearing mustache. Good for him.
Yeah.
Well, it's a choice, all right, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Quite a choice.
Yeah, I did enjoy this movie. I'm not sure I enjoyed it as much as The Man from Hong Kong, though.
No, I don't think so. I mean, because our villain doesn't, chew the scenery as well as George Lazenby does.
Well, and like one of the side villains dies like 2 seconds into the movie. It feels like, right? Like the prison warden just gets murdered, and you're like, wait, that's it? Like I thought that there was going to be like an actual villain.
Well, and as a Hugh Keys Byrne fan, I was just like, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And then he shows up for like one scene. I was like, oh, that was it. Okay.
Yeah, in that Almost Hollywood documentary, they talk about these American actors coming to Australia, and I think this movie probably would have benefited from having an Australian actor playing Mad Dog Morgan.
I think so. I mean, I've seen, even Jack Thompson, who played that sergeant at the beginning, who's talking to the camera. He would have been a great Mad Dog Morgan. So many of these guys would have been a great Mad Dog Morgan. Roger Ward would have been Hugh Keys-Byrne. I mean, Hugh Keys-Byrne had the hair for it and everything. He could have grown the beard.
Yeah, and instead we've got Dennis Hopper with like the fakest of fake beards doing the like laughably tie fucking over the top stereotypical accent.
But at the same time, if it wasn't Dennis Hopper, I think this movie would be a lot more sedate, and we might not be talking about it now.
Yeah, no, that's. I think that is the truth, the true kind of takeaway from this film is that it is still a film worth talking about because it is Dennis Hopper. Otherwise, American audiences probably never would have watched it unless you're Tarantino and you're like, oh yeah, I saw this movie and I copied Kill Bill with the part where they're spitting. It's like, fuck off, dude. Like we know that you are not the kind of person who goes and watch fucking Star Wars and appreciates it. You're the guy who watches exploitation films and then rips it off because most people have never seen it. So I'm not sure that this movie would have played in the States without Dennis Hopper.
Speaking of Star Wars, did you know there's a Star Wars connection here? Actually, there's 2 Star Wars connections that I can think of right off the bat.
I did not, but they have nothing to do with Dennis Hopper, I'm assuming.
No, unfortunately. That would have been pretty cool if he had played Jango Fett.
Yeah, it would have been the coolest.
Or Count Dooku. Count Dooku, I think, would have been better. But anyway.
Yeah, dude. I mean, that would have worked, sure.
Right.
I don't think Dennis Hopper is as physically imposing as Christopher Lee is.
Bruce Spence, who has just a very bit part in here, he was one of the aliens that is, I think he's on a planet where, oh God, I can remember what he looks like. And I think like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor comes and rides a lizard around. So whatever movie that one is.
That's the second film. Wait,
okay.
No, that's the
is that the third one?
That's the third film, yeah.
Okay, and then Jack Thompson, who played Detective Manwaring, he shows up in, I think it's the third one, as Klieg Lars. So the original, like Uncle Owen's dad, I guess it would be, or Lars is a very familiar name.
Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru.
Yeah, he's there on. He's there on Tatooine. So, yeah, there's definitely some weird connections there. I guess they must have shot those movies in Australia. Is that right?
No, they shot those movies in... wait, we're talking about the original?
No. I'm talking about those abominations.
Right. Hey, you know what? Again, I don't think those movies are good, but I will say the same thing about them that I have said before. At least George Lucas made the movies he wanted to make, and he didn't really take no for an answer. Literally didn't take no for an answer. And Rick McCallum never said no to begin with. So at least he made the movies he wanted. But that's kind of weird that there's like a Star Wars connection to this film, of all films.
Yeah. Okay, he is the father of Owen Lars, Klieg Lars. Okay, so yeah, Owen Lars, that's where the Lars name comes from.
An interesting connection to the country of Australia. Joel Edgerton. Is it Joel Edgerton? Joel Edgerton plays young Owen Lars in Star Wars Episode 3.
Ooh.
Oof, look at that one. That's like a Connect 4 right there. Bing, bing, bing. Got all 4 of them right there. But, you know, the thing about Not Quite Hollywood that I do find a little strange about this film, because it does relate to that whole hiring American actors to be in Hollywood. And we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet because everything we've watched up to this point has been very much Australia-centric. It seems a little odd to me that you would hire someone else to play such a iconic, I guess, Australian figure. I mean, look what happened when Spielberg had Abraham Lincoln to cast and he hired Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, he won an Oscar because his performance was so great and he lost himself in it. And Daniel Day-Lewis is the modern day method actor, you know, of method actors. And I understand that, but like in this, it's such a character that seems ingrained in the country of Australia. And they chose a guy who is like as white bread America as you can get. The guy's born in like
Kansas.
Yeah, he's born in Is it Kansas or Missouri? I mean, Dennis Hopper is from the Midwest. So yeah, he's born in Dodge City, Kansas. So it's like, and you hire him to do like a really cheeseball Irish accent and be Australian? Like it strikes me as odd.
Yeah. And after they had just failed pretty spectacularly with Mick Jagger as Ned Kelly in 1970, it's like there was a bad precedent that was already set because I think Kelly comes after Mad Dog Morgan, but he's kind of cut from the same cloth. But yeah, it could have been, it was probably controversial, but who knows?
Well, and again, I mean, the whole having American actors playing Australian parts really pissed off a lot of people in the Australian film industry, which I completely understand. They're very protective of they were protective of their fledgling cinema industry, and I understand why.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know they seem to have a lot of gripes about, like, Stacy Keach and Jamie Lee Curtis in Road Games, but at the same time, that movie is fucking amazing.
I've never seen it, but watching that Not Quite Hollywood documentary made me want to.
It's worth your time.
Is it kind of like The Hitchhiker movie? What's that movie called?
The Hitcher? No, it's
The Hitcher.
It's more like Rear Window, but as a road movie.
Okay, because I guess they explained it like Rear Window as a road movie. It looked good. I mean, I like Stacy Keach and Jamie Lee Curtis Jamie Lee Curtis is Jamie Lee Curtis. I'll give Jamie Lee Curtis a pass on that movie because she is the horror femme fatale / heroine / scream queen of scream queens. So you want to cast her in a horror movie? Be my guest. I don't think anyone should be complaining about that.
Yeah, Keach is fantastic in it. And the direction, who is it? Richard Franklin, I think it was. He is phenomenal. He knows Hitchcock backwards and forwards, and it really comes through in that film.
And again, talking about this film, I think that Philip Mora's direction comes through in this film, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And it makes me want to see more of his stuff. I've only seen a few of his films, but he did things that I didn't realize that he did. He did The Return of Captain Invincible, which is one that I've been wanting to see for a long time.
We should do a podcast on that because it sounds batshit insane.
It sounds absolutely crazy, yeah.
Alan Arkin as a superhero. And you know what? I guarantee you someone's mind just got blown because they didn't even know about it. You know what? You'd be in the same boat as me because until I watched Not Quite Hollywood, I didn't know that was a thing either.
I want to say it's a musical, but I could be wrong.
Oh my God.
And isn't Christopher Lee in it too?
Sign me up. Yeah, he sure is. It is a musical. God, why? As much as I'm enjoying talking about this movie, we should be talking about that movie because on top of everything else, Richard O'Brien wrote the music for that movie.
Right.
Holy shit. That's we should be talking about it right now.
And then Philippe Mora also did The Beast Within, which I've seen the cover art for I don't know how many times. He did a documentary called Swastika, which is available in full on YouTube, which I might happen to have downloaded just recently because I want to see it. Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, and Howling 3, The Marsupials. Fucking crazy.
Also directed Communion.
Yeah, that one really took me by surprise. I haven't seen that movie yet, but now I really want to see it.
And everyone's favorite, Pterodactyl Woman from Beverly Hills, which doesn't sound like a movie I think anyone has any interest in seeing. But it has Beverly D'Angelo in it, so...
And he's still working like crazy.
Yeah. But again, like for me, the thing that I walk away from, Mad Dog Morgan with in regards to Philippe Mora's direction is he takes it in unexpected directions that I would not have expected from a film that is what this film is.
He actually directed one called Snide and Prejudice, which I saw a few years ago. I can't remember who recommended it to me, but oh my goodness, this movie is absolutely nuts. It's like this whole thing that takes place. I might have watched it when I was doing research for the 9th configuration, because it all takes place at a mental institution. And Rene Auberjonois is a psychiatrist, and I can't remember who plays the guy who thinks he's Hitler. Oh, Angus McFadden. And then it's just got all of these very familiar faces like Brian James, Mick Fleetwood, Richard Edson, all these guys in here. And yeah, that one is fucking crazy too.
Man, I love Rene Auberjonois. Good Lord.
Yeah.
I listen to audiobooks all the time, and he is the narrator for my 2 favorite authors who write together, and he has become the voice of those audiobooks.
Nice.
And Rene, I know everybody knows him from Deep Space Nine. That's fine, but the thing that I always know about Rene Auberjonois is his audiobook work, which I know is a really weird thing to know him from, but the dude's voice is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I grew up watching Benson, and then he's in so many of the Robert Altman films.
And he was Odo on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
That's always the one. That's the thing, right?
That's the tombstone right there.
Yeah. Rene Auberjonois, Odo from Deep Space Nine, has passed away. Yeah. I guess he was also on Boston Legal, which is a lot of fun.
Right,
So.
but don't say that he passed away, because he's still around.
Yeah, I know, I'm saying, but that's what CNN's byline would be.
Right.
Below R. Kelly finally in jail, getting horribly, passed around like a pack of cigarettes. So.
Getting an M branded on his hand. You see how I brought it back?
Exactly. Right back to this movie having no problem showing Dennis Hopper getting raped in the first half an hour.
No.
And, oh my God, this movie doesn't have a lot of special effects and a lot of effect work, but the effect of a man's head being blown up from behind is fucking, it's so well done. I, laughed so hard at how, hilariously over the top it was when the guy gets shot.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, this movie's going for it. I didn't know what to expect with this movie. And when you have a character's head just exploding into red blood goo, it's just great. I loved it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it takes some weird left turns.
It does. It really does. They showed Dennis Hopper getting raped. They showed a bunch of quote unquote Chinamen, as the film would say, smoking opium, and then one of the characters getting his head blown off. And it's just such a weird movie. It's a weird mix of things that is characteristically Australian cinema, and then you add in one of the finest American actors of the last century. It's this weird melange of things that it works in spite of itself, considering how Dennis Hopper was a menace on set.
Yeah. I just want to let folks know, I don't know how the quality of this is on Amazon Prime, but it is available to stream on Amazon Prime right now. Apparently, as is Swastika and Howling 3: The Marsupials. So there's a lot of other Philip Mora stuff out there that they can check out.
I want to watch the Howling 3. I've never seen the first Howling to begin with, so...
I did an episode on the whole Howling series. I would say stop at 3. And the second one is...
I mean, the subtitle alone.
Well, the second one was supposed to be a vampire movie, and then they changed it to werewolves at the end, and you can tell that it was supposed to be a vampire movie. It's really the werewolf thing just does not fit. But Howling 3 with the marsupials is fucking amazing.
From the Not Quite Hollywood documentary, it looked like it.
Right?
Yeah. So what would you give this film out of 5?
I'd give it 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I would give it 3 as well. It's not a great movie, but it does enough interesting stuff to keep you engaged throughout. Mm-hmm. Which, if we're talking about a film like this, it wasn't just generic run-of-the-mill, which I do appreciate.
Yeah, no, definitely not run-of-the-mill. I can't think of any mill that would have a run of this.
Yeah, which I thought was a lot of fun. So, so let's take a break and we'll play a preview for the next Culture Cast.
But what sort of security man could afford not to take it seriously?
You've always said you were the one person who could rob this place.
Yes, that's true.
Brian, your truck, our truck, will be the second last one in.
I got $2 million in that van. $2 million? What's the bloody matter? You've been around money too long. You're going off your head.
Looks like he couldn't find his way out of a light fog.
You've got a secret, haven't you? What is it?
You cut me in for a modest percentage, and I'll let the whole plan go ahead and give you some backup. How about that, Eric?
There's no safe in here. That's that old arm.
Trust is the name of the game, Brian.
Trust? If one of your mob said good morning, I'd put on my pajamas and go to bed. That's how much I trust.
I take it we're unanimous in telling their management they can shove their chains.
No! Look, sport, your expensive video gear's on the blink. Did you send someone over straight away? It's our big day.
Look, I haven't got a secret. Well, maybe it's a secret of Darcy's.
We have one dissenting voice.
That's right. Listen, if we're chained to the money, it'll make it impossible for anyone to steal it.
Do you think I look like Faye Dunaway? God's at work, reckon I do.
Do something about that blood, Ernest. It'll run all over the carpet.
Yes, you do.
Bring in the nail clippers. They say the counting house is impregnable, but someone has a plan to relieve it of $20 million. There's a plan to take it from him and one to stop him. The lucky ones only lose their toes.
That's right. On the next Culturecast, we're going to be talking about the final film of Mike White March. We're going to be talking about The Money Movers, a film I know nothing about. I don't even think it was mentioned in the Not Quite Hollywood documentary.
I don't think it was either.
Which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, I'm very interested to watch it a second time because the first time I was confused as heck. So I'm curious what your take is going to be on this one.
You're setting me up for excitement.
Well, I
haven't watched it yet, so...
Well, it's not confusing because it's slow. It's confusing because it might be one of the fastest cut movies I've seen in a long time, which coming from, 78? I was surprised at the pacing of this film. But we'll talk about that more next week.
On the next episode of the Cultured Cast. Until then, where can people find your lovely voice, Mr. Mike White?
You can always find me and my face for radio over at projectionboothpodcast.com. And also, I'm one of the 2 unlucky co-hosts of the Kolchak Tapes, which is available at the kolchaktapes.com.
Almost about to be lucky because we're almost done with the 2006 version of the show.
Whew.
Boy,
it's about time.
Yeah, right? God damn, it's dragged and dragged and dragged some more, and it's finally about to be gone, and I could not be happier. You can find me on Twitter at CultureStash. You can find the Culture Cast on Twitter at CultureCast. You can also find me on a little podcast I do called Chronicles from the Crypt with our good friend Father Malone, a.k.a. Mike Wallace. You can find that over at chroniclesfromthecrypt.com, where we talk about Chronicles from the Crypt. That's not what we talk about. We talk about Tales from the Crypt, a show that I don't think Mike White likes very much, at least not the episodes that he's watched and talked about with us. And Mike White and I and Mike Wallace all talk about Twilight Zone 85 together on a little podcast called Dreams for Sale. You can find that one at twilightzone85.com. Big thanks to you, Mike, as always, for sitting down and talking with me about this interesting Australian take on a biopic.
Well, thank you for having me on, as always.
And we'll catch you on the next Culture Cast.